welcome. And it's over and over impressive how many people find their way to the different events. There's such a strong competition that seeing so many people here in the auditorium is really a good sign that talking about civil rights defenders, digital rights defenders, is a subject which refers to each and everyone. And for this, I would like, on behalf of the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and on behalf of GIZ, give a very, very warm welcome to all of you. Not so long ago, the internet was considered by all of us a source of hope. We were thinking, finally, we have a media for equal participation, for cooperation and collaboration in a new way, not a one-sided communication, but a two-sided cooperation. We were thinking about a new media for expression, for transparency, for participation. And nowadays, in the last years, especially in the last months, what do we associate with the social media, with the internet? The words, the expression which first come to our minds are surveillance, data abuse, censorship, hatred. And still, on one hand, we are sitting here to remember our past hopes, to remember that still the internet and the social media have the potential of creating a new source of information, a new source of participation, that people can use social media and internet to get their voices heard, to get the information they need, and to get better access to education systems, to health systems, and to participate in governance processes. At the same time, the dark side of the digital age has come, especially in the last months, very much to our knowledge and is a growing source of concern for us. Internet shutdowns, cyber attacks, manipulation of online content, invasion of privacy, lack of data protection, and Cambridge Analytics, which we all might associate in this moment, are just some of the current challenges. We need to address them to strengthen and save the internet as a tool for future, which can bring all our hopes we once had into being. Digital rights are human rights. I think this is very important and are thus a guiding principle of German development cooperation, online as well as offline. The strategy on human rights in German development policy, adopted in 2011, underscores the significance of human rights and of the human rights-based approach in each and everything German development cooperation is doing. And so, the people behind, the human rights defenders, the digital rights defenders, are extremely important partners for us. Very often they work under extremely difficult and under dangerous conditions because of the difficult human rights situation in our partner countries. And as the frontline defenders, an organization has recently very sadly told the world in 2017 more than 300 human rights defenders, digital rights defenders were murdered, and the number of people detained, tortured and harassed are much, much larger. We are extremely concerned about the shrinking space of human rights defenders and sometimes even the closed space of human rights defenders across the different regions. Human rights on and offline are an important topic for the discussion of the German government with partner governments. We, on one hand, as German Development Corporation, are very much aware that even staging such an event today may expose civil and digital right defenders to additional risks, and we have to be extremely careful not to make the risk larger. And in this context, I'm particularly glad that we have two civil rights activists here, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Nighat Dad from Pakistan and Abir Ghattas from the Lebanon, who dare to be here. Great to have you here. And it's also a particular pleasure to announce Dr. Erin Saltman from Facebook. We had already a very interesting and constructive discussion this morning, identifying a large area of possible cooperation in future, and also a very warm welcome to Dr. Erin Saltman. I think we all agree it's our common duty to do everything we can to protect human rights defenders, digital rights defenders. How to do it and what we can learn from you, I'm very excited to listen to the coming discussion. And with these words, I'd like to hand over the mic to Lorena, who will lead us through the discussion. Thanks a lot and enjoy the next hour, and let's learn.
Thank you, Mr. Proksch, for your introduction. Let me introduce myself. My name is Lorena Jaume-Palasí, and I will be the moderator of this fantastic session. It was a great warm-up for the conversation we're about to have, Mr. Proksch, so we are very happy indeed to have a powerhouse of competence and experience from diverse parts of the world to talk about the challenges that human rights defenders are experiencing online, among others in online platforms, but not only. And we will also talk about their success stories and hopefully distillate a few recommendations. So to my very right is Nighat Dad. She is the Executive Director of Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan. She is an accomplished lawyer and a human rights activist. Nighat is one of the pioneers who have been campaigning around access to open internet in Pakistan and globally. She is a TED Global Fellow for 2017, has been listed as STAM's Next Generation Leader, and is the recipient of Atlantic Council Freedom Award and Human Rights to Live Award. Yeah, wow. Equally impressive, slightly in the center, Abir Ghattas. She is a Lebanese activist, a digital communication strategist, and a digital security trainer. Abir is currently the Communications and Outreach Director for Receive22, a pan-Arab independent media platform, and also the Outreach Director for Mayal, a network of digital platforms centered on securing freedom of expression and access to information. They have fantastic infographics and reports documenting human rights abuses. It's really impressive. Abir's work in media and writing focuses on women's rights and the intersection of gender and tech.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah.
And our third equally impressive expert on the stage is Dr. Erin Saltman. She's Facebook's counterterrorism policy manager for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Her background and expertise includes both far-right and Islamist extremist processes of radicalization within a range of regional and social political contexts. Her research and publications have focused on the evolving nature of online extremism and terrorism, gender dynamics within violent extremism organizations, and youth radicalization. Erin's previous work includes senior research positions at Quillen Foundation and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, where she is still a fellow. She regularly advises governments, but also NGOs, on issues related to online counterterrorism and counter-extremism strategies. So, big round of applause for our third speaker. Now, let's talk a bit about the challenges. Nighat, Abir, what are the major challenges that, as a human rights defenders, you, but also your colleagues, are facing online in your regions, but specifically, what are the techniques, what are the strategies, what are examples that can document how this really works in real life, and what type of groups are being specifically targeted as well?
Yeah, so I mean, we all know that how these civil society spaces are being shrinking in different parts of the world, and Pakistan is not different. And from shutting down NGOs and INGOs to attack human rights defenders and activists, not only in the offline spaces where disappearances is a massive issue in Pakistan, but also in the online spaces. And the kind of trend that we are seeing in Pakistan is that like when the deep state import surveillance technologies from Western world or different countries who are making these. There was an issue where NetSweeper and other surveillance technologies were being imported in Pakistan back in 2011, and mostly people really didn't know about them. Even the activists really didn't know how to raise awareness or how to raise this issue with the government. But at the European Union level, the issue was raised that how these technologies are being exported to the repressive regimes, although we are so-called democracy. The kind of trend that now we are seeing is that they don't even need to import these surveillance technologies. They now have these raw surveillance technologies that they are making in their own countries, and we have these really cheap, economical, accessible softwares where anyone can have access to it, and then they can surveil activists and human rights defenders. That's something that we are seeing very, very much in Pakistan, but also for most of the internet users in Pakistan, Facebook is an internet. So the entire internet. So most of them are using these platforms for not only for their work, but for activism, without even knowing that how they are making themselves vulnerable. And that's how the people who attack them, be it state actors or non-state actors, they use these platforms while sending different attachments and links, malware links, to these activists, and while baiting them that, hey, look at this picture of protest, or just like in a way where activists can just like quickly open the link, and these platforms are being used to monitor and surveil activists like that. The biggest challenge that I see is that not only the massive use of surveillance technologies, but also the lack of awareness among activists and older movements who are leading activism in Pakistan. I mean, I'll talk about Pakistan because they really don't care about if they are being monitored and surveilled. And the kind of argument that we as digital rights activists or digital security trainer, I hear from activists is, it's fine if we are being surveilled because we are not doing anything wrong. So you see that it's very hard for us as like very few people who are doing this work on digital rights or raising awareness on digital security in a country where more than 200 million people of population we have, and 18% are on internet. So it's very hard for us to make them realize that how problematic it is for them, how they are making themselves vulnerable. But it's not just the technologies that are making people vulnerable, but also the lack of awareness and also interest, and realizing that right to privacy is their fundamental right.
Well, thank you for that explanation. So this means specifically older generations are the ones that are really failing and to understand that malware is being used to target them.
It's the older generations who are beacon of these movements, and the younger generations are joining these movements, and the same sort of mindset is shifting to the younger generation, where the concept of privacy actually not there.
Thank you. Abir, how does it look like in Lebanon?
Well, I'm going to kind of not only talk about Lebanon, because the work I've been doing spreads over like Middle East, even in Egypt, a bit in North Africa. And like, when you ask your question, I'm like, okay, what don't we face? So first of all, we live in oppressive countries. That varies from one country to the other, but there's also this trend of allied dictatorships that they learn from each other. So when we're against the system or their values, or just trying to promote human rights, you're automatically a target. You asked who are the targets? Well, political activists, of course, sexual rights activists, and I would say anyone like activists who are pushing for freedom of expression, free speech, journalists, the fact that we need to have independent media, not state-controlled. So all of that, all of the people who are working in this are targets. And the techniques to attack them are so diverse and evolved, and it kind of have everything. You have phishing campaigns directed, very smart. Lately in Egypt with Nile fish, where mostly over 170 activists, where it was a targeted campaign. It's government sponsored. The EIPR revealed with Citizen Lab, they did a whole study about it, and it is a government attack. You have travel bans. Activists are not allowed to travel. They are under arbitrary arrests. LGBT activists are tortured, are taken into, they're arrested, and you don't know, if you're lucky, you know where they are, and most of the time you don't know where they are. In Lebanon, in the UAE, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, you have this new technique of, okay, we're going to pass anti-terrorism law, and then we're going to slam charges to activists under this law. So just to kind of silence you, because either it's national security, either you're promoting ideas that eventually will help terrorists, and like, you know, human rights now, activists equal people who can be tried under anti-terrorism law and cyber. You have cyber crime bureaus in Lebanon that act as basically, you know, you're a journalist, you're a blogger, you're an activist, you're trying to write, you try to organize on Facebook, on Twitter. I mean, these are the tools we have, and we will use them, right? So because of a post, because of a campaign, you are arrested, you are questioned, and there's no legal ground for this. So we're up against a system and an unfair, unjust justice system. So yeah, that's what we're up against.
That's a wide range. Erin, Facebook has a definition of protected categories of people, right? And can you give some numbers and a specific definition about that? Are the people that are being mentioned by Abir and Nighat also in that definition? Would that, human rights defenders, is that a part of that definition? And you're working in the EMEA region, so I'm not going to ask you for global numbers, but if you have some numbers from the EMEA region, it would be great.
Well, when we talk about protected categories of people, we're talking about a lot of speech that we see and what is considered hate speech and attackative speech against protected categories of people. And within that dialogue, it's a very cross-functional discussion behind the scenes. So I come from more of the counter-extremism, counter-terrorism background, but I'll be working with people with human rights backgrounds, people from legal backgrounds, people with former law enforcement backgrounds, and protected categories include a lot of the ones that you would see on a UN protected categories list, like race, ethnicity, gender, but we go further than that actually on Facebook because we have younger individuals on our platform and because we see a lot of different types of bullying and harassment. So it would also include sexual orientation, sexual identity. It would include serious disabilities or serious illnesses as well. And so we take it in this global policy to have a quite robust protected category, but we also would take into consideration very regional or localized protections that are needed. For example, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot if on stage to you I call you an atheist or out you as an atheist, but in Pakistan that could actually get me harmed or potentially killed. So we have protected categories in countries like Pakistan around something like atheism, which might not traditionally be covered in other countries. Or we have to evolve that policy. So in the last few years, we've seen an increased amount of hate speech around refugees, but also around terminology for migrants. And it's not worth getting into a political discussion about the legal structure behind refugees versus migrants. Obviously, these are terms that are being used in really insightful and hate-based ways. And so we had to increase our categories to make sure to include extra motivation around protection for migrants and refugees. So this is an evolving space, but one that is usually more robust than what a lot of governments put forward as protected categories, and one that has to evolve as different crises or as different threat levels or incitement comes out in different parts of the world.
So this means actually the categories, it's evolving, and this means that there are some people, some part of the team, of your team, I guess, you, but also other departments decide on what needs to be added to that. Do you have an ethical team working on that, or how does it work? How does the mechanism look like when you decide to add a new category such as atheist?
Well, I think this will come up in a lot of the different things we'll discuss, but that it can't just be Facebook working in a silo to Facebook standards. So not only do we have operations teams around the world that kind of see the content that is flagged and might see a crisis or a trend starting to emerge before other actors might, but we also work with a lot of civil society organizations, human rights organizations, and NGOs on the ground. And that's why, although we'll have our general global protected categories, we do have to take into consideration crises or trends that might be dangerous that start emerging and want to evolve as that evolves. So it can't just be static in the online space, especially when we look at things like slur terms and what would be considered an offensive slur. And the fact that that also has nuance and context, because we might see that a certain persecuted group might also use that slur term or try to reclaim that word as a part of an empowerment structure. So we can't be very black and white even when we look at certain terms that we might think look like hate speech under any context. Context is always important. So in operationalizing these types of policies, we need a lot of nuanced understanding, and we need to look at context.
So what about you both? You both are as human rights defenders involved in different organizations. You have two organizations that you're running, and Nighat, you are also have different projects and initiatives. Are any of you partnering with Facebook, for instance, or any other similar platform to strengthen human rights online? What's your position to intermediary and your relationship with intermediaries?
Well,
or let's say it like that. Are they relevant for your work?
There's 250 million Arab users on Facebook. So I wouldn't really call it a partnership, right? We're there, I mean, everyone is there. So we don't have a choice not to be there. And when we go and give trainings for activists and campaigners and advocates, we never say, hey, don't use Facebook because, I don't know, it's not secure or whatever. We do not say that at all. It's more of, Facebook is there, everyone is using it. Activism on Facebook is not necessarily, wouldn't say it's really, I mean, Facebook makes money. It has a business model, you have ads, brands are there, companies are there, and activists are a very few bunch of these 250 million. And I know that, and everyone who's doing awareness campaigns also know that. So we cannot leave it. And we were saying everything has its flaws, and I don't know, so far we've been helped by Facebook. Sometimes we've been failed by Facebook, but it's a process, I would say. So this is personally our experience.
Yeah, for us, as I said, that a lot of people, for them, internet in Pakistan is Facebook, so we really can't leave Facebook behind. And so when we do trainings with them, especially human rights defenders and activists, they are using this platform for their activism. And so it's very important for us to tell them how to navigate around this platform. What are the things that they can adopt? What are the things that they need to be very cautious and careful. One thing that I would say that I'm also very much into women's rights movement in Pakistan, and when Facebook and other social media platforms started, booming in Pakistan, lots of people found their voice in the online space, and these platforms basically empowered them and gave them voice. And women, who basically consist more than 50% of the population, don't really find these spaces in the physical world to voice their opinions, and especially in a patriarchal structural society. So for them, these online spaces mean a lot. And when they find these, when they voice their opinions, which mostly challenge stereotypes and challenge the patriarchal structure, they face a lot of backlash. So a lot of young women and girls started reaching out to me that they are facing bullying and stalking and rape threats and death threats. And they have been reporting to Facebook and other platforms, but they are not really doing anything about it. And those posts are still there. And there is and as Erin mentioned about the context, there is a greater risk of woman who has a fake Facebook profile, and if somebody in her conservative family, mostly the male elders, who sometimes don't know that they are using these platforms, these women are using platforms, and they're putting up their pictures, and the pictures even covering their head, can actually challenge the patriarchy. So it put them at their life at risk. And some of the women have been honor killed just because they had access to mobile phones, or they had profiles on these platforms, or somebody made fake profiles of them. So it was very hard for us to, I myself burnt out, listening to these complaints day and night and in the middle of the night and not doing anything about it. So we reached out to Facebook and we told them they need to do something about it. So we still get complaints, and I started cyber harassment helpline in December 2016 in Pakistan. It's the region first helpline, where so far we have received more than 1,600 calls, 70% by young women and girls. And whenever there is a complaint that, hey, we have reported this at Facebook and nothing has been done, we have a channel where we can escalate this to Facebook and they can take it down in just a couple of hours. So I see that, yes, there is a chance of working with these intermediaries and tell them what exactly our context and what are the things that can put people at risk, and it's completely normal in the Western world. That's I don't know if I would say it collaboration or partnership, but I think we are trying to make these platforms understand what are our contexts in a conservative Muslim patriarchal society, and how they can help us in sort of, maybe making their policies and mechanisms more better. And sometimes I feel not good about having this channel, I feel that every Facebook user should have access to this channel, and these policies and mechanisms should work equally for everyone.
Well, thank you for these insights. And this really applies to threats that affect human rights defenders, but also many civilians that might not be a human rights defender, but just as you're saying, it's young girls, women that are just trying to have social participation and inclusion within the online sphere. And this regards specifically the society, but it comes, there is a different dimension to threats concerning human rights defenders, but also civilians when it comes to politics. So let's get into the harder questions. There is a global policy in Facebook, right, Erin? And of course, you abide to the fundamental rights of the UN Declaration, and you've been partnering with other companies saying that you want to make you support human rights. But on the other side, of course, you have to abide the law of the local regulation where your company is present. So, how do you balance those two different policies? Because many countries, as we are hearing, those two codes, so to say, ethical codes or legal codes, do collide with each other. How is the structure where you decide, okay, in this case, we're going to abide by the law, in this case, we're going to try to create a back channel, or have you ever thought, for instance, of saying, as Google did, we're out of this country? I'm asking this because, of course, in the last months, there's been a lot of criticism towards what Facebook has been doing, specifically, for instance, in Myanmar with the case of the Rohingyas, where I guess this is one of the biggest examples where you see that your global policy collides with the regulation of a country, where the government has been using Facebook to produce ethnic cleansing of the Rohingyas.
Oh, well, that's a lot of topics into one question that I wish I had a full hour just to talk through. But find me after the conversation if I don't cover every single point. I mean, I think it's important that we have a global policy because implied in a global policy are certain ethical and moral standards that are catering more to democratic and human rights-based principles. And of course, we also look at what local legal infrastructure and laws are, but we also think it's important to have one primary standard globally so that an activist in one country is not treated differently than an activist in another, or a political party in one country is not treated differently to another. Within that, there's a couple caveats, obviously. So we want to make sure that if we're getting the line incorrectly, if a profile is taken down erroneously, as many activists that I've talked to around the world all have a story about something that was taken down in error. So I'm really happy that last week, finally, we did actually launch a rights to appeal button, which means that it will be reviewed and go through the loop to have a second review on that infrastructure. I am pleased to say that also when it comes to certain governments, if governments are requesting data or requesting information, that has a very strong legal structure. The MLAT is the, how is that? Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. If anyone wants to find a lawyer in the room and talk through it, there's always a lot of lawyers. Anytime governments are requesting data, which we do see in a lot of governments, especially around election times or certain controversies or events that take place, there's a robust infrastructure around that. And that's very important. And it's also important that we have transparency. So when governments make requests for us to take down content, or if a government is describing an organization, for example, as a terrorist organization that really, by our guidelines, is not a terrorist organization, as an example, we will put that against our own guidelines, and we will not censor if it does not break our guidelines and thresholds. And this is where it is a constant conversation, and in some countries that does mean that we are playing a tightrope walking game of, well, they are threatening to shut the internet down, or they're threatening to block Facebook in some instances. But I think it's very important that we have that global standard to stand by that is based on different principles we've looked at, and that we've talked with the UN, and that we've talked with human rights organizations, so that that's in the basic principles of it. And you brought up Myanmar as an example of a devastating state of events that continues. And the main thing that we have to take away are 2 points that relate to some of the points that my colleagues up here have said. One is that we need hyper-localized understanding. We need very good language understanding on the ground, especially in Myanmar. We saw that there are certain words that in and of themselves don't necessarily mean anything, but in the context of how they were being used actually caused incitement to violence. I'm pleased that we have been working with civil society groups on the ground there for the last 5+ years, but that we needed a more robust infrastructure there. And we needed operations teams that had really in-depth language understanding. And so those operational teams have grown significantly. You learn, unfortunately, more from your errors than you do from your successes. So this is why this space is a constantly evolving space. And as we grow, that growth is not happening just in California. That growth has to happen in our offices that are around the world, so that we have this global policy, but we have hyper-localized and regional understanding to carry out those policies.
Well, thank you for the open words and for admitting errors and being here as well to getting yourself addressing and giving some answers. Let's try to bring in your own perspectives and your own experiences into the Facebook ethics standards. You've been, both of you, experiencing problems within your networks when using Facebook, but you also be following, for instance, you, Nighat, been following the testimony of Mark Zuckerberg before the Congress. And there he said that he would protect the integrity of the electoral campaigns in countries like Pakistan specifically or India. In your opinion, what should Facebook do and what are your concerns in this regard?
So again, the debate around fake news is much active and hyper in other countries, but in Pakistan, like, people really don't know what fake news is or false news is, and the consumers on internet, they don't know how to verify fake news. They don't know how to. They just like disseminate, like whatever comes their way. So I guess I don't know how to deal with this, and I think I would ask this question to Erin, that what they are actually doing about this, because the general election in Pakistan is just around the corner, and all these political parties have these massive social media teams who are spreading fake news, and their consumers are actually, like consuming these news and without even knowing how to verify them or how to, deal with this issue. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the question that you should have asked to Facebook.
Oh no, that's in the plan. I wanted to give you two first the place and the time to say what you think Facebook should do, and then let Erin react to your ideas.
Well, one thing I think it would be a good idea if Facebook makes the GDPR data protection framework applicable to all its users, no matter where they are. I mean, it's a good standard. Thank you, Nani. And okay, our governments do not protect our data, do not protect at least what we're giving Facebook. Yeah, why not, right? I don't know, users in the Middle East, in Pakistan, anywhere else, I think they deserve that because, and I want to just open this because, okay, this is European standards, because you have this also kind of like, okay, GDPR is a good thing, but our government uses surveillance tools and software that is developed here, right? So Germany, UK, Netherlands, Italy, France, they all export software to our governments to actually oppress us. That's what it is. It's dual use and, okay, for terrorists, but they're not using it like this. Like, for example, I'm just going to give the number. In the past 3 years, the EU member states permitted export of cyber surveillance technology at least 317 times, and they only denied 14 applications. So you have activists in the UAE, for example, like Ahmad Mansour, who gets, who's, of course, has been detained for the past 3 years, I guess. His phone is hacked. They show him data, like text messages from correspondence, and then they, I don't know, so charges are brought against him. Bahraini activist, their data is compromised. And in case they don't sell you the data, they sell it for the UAE, and as I said, it's allied dictatorships. They're all allies. And then the UAE goes around and gifts Cerebro, for example, which is, they bought it from Amesis in France, for Egypt. And Egypt is using these tools to oppress and to monitor and to get information on activists and human rights defenders, not only on terrorists. Actually, it's not on terrorists, it's on this, right? And we exist in a place where we don't have a judiciary process that is fair, that is unbiased. So, yeah, I mean, thank you for GDPR if we will get it, but what about the weapons that these governments, the EU, is exporting and allowing that are mainly used to oppress us?
Yeah. So I hear 2 points here. There is one part of that with regards to Facebook, of course, and the other part with regards to the European Union, which transcends Facebook, of course, which is more about sport controls and of dual-use technologies. So let's try first to concentrate on the first part so that Erin can react, and then go to the second, because I think it's really important. We need to address this. This is not only about the stakes and the challenges of human rights defenders in online platforms, but there are many other aspects of online threats, and we haven't got there, and I want to address this, of course. Erin, adapting the GDPR globally.
Sorry,
how about that?
But I think it's valid that these points divert, and some of it will be on Facebook and off of Facebook because there's a blurring. There's also a blurring in our online and offline space. And actually, when you talk to younger people, you don't talk about online and offline because I'm talking to you and I leave and I continue the conversation via text. And then same with security, and where is it one domain versus another. So I think it's fair that our stream of consciousness probably ends up blurring quite a lot. When obviously around GDPR, I'm not going to be the absolute minutiae detail. There's a lot of details in that document. However, everything that we're evolving around GDPR is meant to be global. So those standards are meant to be put out on a global level. So that's a watch this space positive, I think, and that's how we should be pushing our standards. You talked a little bit about elections and upcoming elections in different places, and that's been brought up quite a lot in a more public space. But I would say that we find it very important that we have an elections integrity team, that there's a team that looks at a global level of upcoming elections and will bring a strategic cross-functional team together. Sometimes I'm a part of that, sometimes I'm not, depending on the country it's in, to look at what we think risks might be in that country or region if it's European elections. And one important aspect that we've evolved recently has been higher transparency around ads. So I think that's really important to hit home, that now when you're on a page, you can actually click and see the ads that they're running. This is not just around elections, but obviously it has significance for elections as well, so that you can see what page is trying to put out what messaging and what campaign. We're also doing a couple different things around reducing hoaxes and fake news, and that includes that repeat abusers that are flagged for propagating misinformation or fake news, they will get downranked, and eventually, if they're a repeat abuser, they'll lose the ability to be able to use ads. They won't be able to fund communication through advertisements online.
But let me try to get a bit more of an understanding, because when it comes to politics, what is political, it makes things less fake or less, it's a question of opinion, right?
Yes.
The part of politics is that there is a dimension of truth and truthfulness on one side, but on the other is that dimension of opinion, which is not factually needs to be based on facts, right?
Yeah.
How do you decide what is fake in that regard? How you take that decision? Is there a team that is constantly there? And what about political opposition parties?
Well, I don't think that it should be up to a private company to decide truth for the masses. And I think that's a very important point, that a private company should not define that space. So this is another area where it has to be done in partnership. And when we're talking about misinformation, we're talking a lot about actioning the most egregious subjects. We're talking about headlines that imply or incite violence. We're talking about things that border on hate speech especially, but we're also partnering in different countries with journalists and major news media bodies to have them weigh in on where they think this could apply and how that should be applied. So again, Facebook should not be working in a silo, and Facebook should not define what truth is. This becomes very existential and very subjective very quickly. I mean, on top of that, I think it's important that we are now more transparent. As of last week, thankfully, we are more transparent with where our policies actually lie. So we all know that, unless you're a lawyer in the room, nobody reads every single word of a terms of service, but we also have the community standards, which are meant to be a more human discussion around policies. And a lot of activists and human rights activists particularly were dissatisfied with how vague those were. And we've just republished and relaunched that last week to be much more comprehensive. So it's not a change in policy, it's just actually discussing more in detail how we draw the line, where the spirit of that policy is. And I welcome feedback. I'm not just saying that, and I'm sure my inbox is going to suffer because of it. But I think it's important that this becomes more of a two-way dialogue. I think increased transparency is going to be key so that we're not in an opaque space when we talk about really key subjects like elections, like human rights abuses, and like where the line gets drawn on censorship.
Okay, so let's try to get to a more positive part. I want to have a Q&A and allow many of you to pose questions, but we don't have much time. We only have 15 minutes, so I'm trying to bridge the big interest that I have to listen to the positive part, the success stories, and the things that went well, or the recommendations that you might have on the one side, and also hear your questions. So I suggest to give us 5 minutes to talk about success stories, and then go and open to the audience. I will gather all the questions together so that we can allow as more questions as possible, and then give it up to you ladies. Abir, you're skeptical when it comes to relying on technical solutions, especially when developed by Western NGOs to protect human rights defenders. Would locally developed tools be an alternative, and what would be your recommendations on that? And if you have success stories, please also go to that.
Yeah. Yes, I am skeptical. I don't like it. I think there's this misconception that Global South people are only consumer of technology. That's not true. We are building our technology. We've been spending the past, 6-7 years adopting resources and guides, especially in the field of digital security and now holistic security, right? And talking to all these Western NGOs and saying, hey, look, one size does not fit all. And Lebanon is not the same as Syria, and we're not the same as Pakistan. So we've been doing all this labor of contextualizing all these material and even tools to be able to use it. But there is an alternative, and the alternative is, instead of just, swipe left to avoid the problem and swipe right to postpone it, no, actually build sustainable partnerships with local NGOs, because flying in an expert for a weekend and then you'll enjoy the hummus and I don't know what, and then we solve the problem. No. We've been working in the Middle East for 12 years now. 12 years. We've been building platform for the LGBT communities where, I don't know if you know, but in most of the Arab states, it's illegal to be gay. Illegal, right? You go to jail. You'll be killed, right? So this is what we're dealing. Having, for example, a rainbow flag is not what I need, right? It's not what the activist needs there. Okay, so there is money. Money is in the West, right? We know that, unfortunately. So the whole system should change. People's approach to philanthropy should change. Instead of just following trends, the Arab Spring, harassment in India, I don't know what. So NGOs are dying, local efforts are dying, and we're still here, and this is a success story, I would say, right? Nighat said she's burned out. She is, and I'm sure her team is, and I'm sure we all are. And we talk about, I tend to go everywhere. Anyway, so we talk about holistic security, right? Holistic is we're trying to integrate self-care, well-being into the life, or like the daily, you're being an activist, right? You're a human rights defender. But we operate in places where we do not have the luxury to sit back and say, sure, well-being, we don't have the luxury. We will keep working until we burn out, until we leave, or until, something really changes. And I see like the role of just sustained local NGOs, your system should be built for them to succeed without you. That's the model that we should all, the West should follow. I mean, of course, I'm grateful for white technology, but white technology is not inclusive. It's not diverse. It's not feminist. So we need that.
It's not many other things as well, right? Thank you very much for that openness. And mathematics was not created by the Europeans. They don't have a patent on that.
Lorena, can I just add
please.
What, because she just provoked me.
In a good way.
In a good way. I think I always wanted to say that there is a lot of labor that we are doing in developing countries for these Western INGOs. A white dude sitting in somewhere else in developed country, get all the money, and then gave a very smaller money to women-led organizations in developing countries doing all the labor. And I think INGOs or donors really need to think about that, because people who are working in these countries constantly being repressed, shut down, and being intimidated by their governments, and at the same time taking all this risk with limited resources and doing all this work for becoming a successful story for somebody else. So I think we really need to look into it.
Yes.
Yes, local NGOs shouldn't work as hard, doubles as hard to get half of what other NGOs are getting, or other, indeed. I would like to introduce the international dimension to that. Nighat, you work on women's rights and cyber harassment, as you explained before, and your organization has contributed to several reports of the UN Special Rapporteurs, both in the fields of freedom of expression, of privacy, and women's rights online. In the last year, the Human Rights Council has adopted several resolutions. Is this development a success story? Is that sort of a help? Is that a good way to go when it comes to international intervention?
I think I feel that if I won't call it a success story, I would still feel that there are these spaces where, the pressure points that we can actually use for our advocacy. And some of these UNSRs, like the UNSR on freedom of expression, David Kai, and the right to privacy, I mean, these UNSRs are doing amazing job. They are actually conveying our messages in the UN structure, whether those work or not, or whether they can pressure the state. But at least states are now feeling the pressure that yes, digital rights are human rights, and we need to look into it.
Yep.
Well, thank you for that. Erin, with regards to Facebook, you also have success stories, not also criticism. Could you mention a few of them before we open the floor?
I guess I would just say the reason I work for Facebook is because of the work I was doing at an NGO before that, which was working with different strategic partners on the ground in different parts of the world and recognizing efforts already being done and then seeing how they could be upscaled and optimized. So when I work with civil society groups from Facebook, it's mostly up to our local policymakers to flag that they need help. So it's not just California or I'm based in London deciding where in the world we should go, but that there's a local need first and that our local and regional policy people are flagging that need. And then it's about not reinventing the wheel, not trying to invent a new organization, not trying to, if people don't want to say that they're talking with Facebook, that really doesn't mean much to me. If I'm honest, the point is to recognize efforts already being done and seeing how we can help with infrastructure or help upscale and optimize them or upskill some of the efforts they're doing in the online space. And that can include everything from making sure they understand how campaigns can be optimized, giving free ad credit, giving advice about what type of content online goes further. We have amazing people that do incredible things offline, and then when they try to put it online, it just doesn't hit their target audience. They don't quite get the online formats. You know, if you want something to hit an audience, it has to be less than 30 seconds and ideally less than 6. And it should be visual, things with video and image. So all these marketing advices, but to campaigners and activists. And it has to look good on mobile because 80% or more in some places, everyone's on mobile. So it might look beautiful on your big screen computer and look horrible on a mobile phone. And so some of these basic learnings are things that offline activists or human rights defenders, it's not intuitive, it's not their space. So Facebook should do what Facebook does well with tooling and capacity and online skills and campaigning. Facebook should not try to do what activists do well, which is local authenticity, local expertise. So I can't go to a region and pretend I'm the expertise on the region. I have my knowledge, they have theirs. Let's use our knowledge in the best way to upscale these efforts holistically, and that needs to be done. So we have things like the Online Civil Courage Initiative or things that are actually giving infrastructure and networking to these activist organizations, and it doesn't have to be owned by us, it should be separate to us.
We have almost run out of time, but still I would like to take at least one, the most 2 questions. Are there any questions in the room?
He's taking your mic away.
It looks like a no, which is, oh, it looks like a yes. So please try to be concise. I will collect them first. And please say your name.
Okay, I just listened to what you said about tools and help NGOs or activists to make them hear themselves better, if I understood well. But is there any way Facebook can help them to get more protections? I'm thinking, for example, about people in Turkey, and you know, with the EU-Turkey agreement, now Europe is closing its eyes on what's happening in Turkey for 2 years' time, but there are some other countries in the same cases. So maybe it's not the role of Facebook, but because we are talking about it, is there any way to make them safer or not be arrested or banned by being caught on the internet by the authorities?
Okay, and the second question right behind?
One of the issues with fake news was people being targeted with news that would persuade them. So what's Facebook doing now to analyse the targeting of adverts and articles to certain user groups to understand whether they might be being pushed towards believing something that's not right?
Well, thank you very much. We'll leave it to that. I think it's both to you. But I guess that the others... I guess that Abir wants to say also something about that because it's part of the region you might...
No.
Nope.
I was giving her my mic, but...
Okay. Well, you guys can definitely chime in since this crosses all of our fields a little bit. Facebook protection. Yeah, we have an entire safety and security team that I work closely with, and there's actually a lot of advice and tips around protection of personal profiles as well as protective measures around groups or pages of NGOs. I mean, I'm happy to, again, give my card out and send a lot of links and helpful resources. This is something that's been worked on a lot. I think there's a lot of just basic security that a lot of NGOs are not aware of. Everything from, you know, how to keep your own privacy and identity as safe as possible depending on who you're trying to engage with. Some activists really want to put themselves out there as a face and voice. Some would rather work with a brand and not actually expose themselves. It depends on what part of the world they're in. And also how to handle hate speech and abuse that might come onto your platform because of the campaigns that you're trying to put out there. I think we all know examples of you can put something very benign out there like a cat video and end up getting anti-Semitic comments. So you don't have to be an activist to deal with some of these challenges. But there's also a series of risk assessments you can take for when is it a good idea to engage with that person in the commentary, when is it a good idea to flag their comment because it crosses a line, and when might you want to hide that comment so that you you are non-aggressive and non-actionary, but that comment doesn't get seen by others. So there's a lot of different things that come into safety and security, especially if people are putting themselves out there online. And there's a lot of resources, so I'm happy to send those around to anybody that would like them. On the fake news side of things, fake news actually means about 10 different things when people start talking about it. Are we talking about a clickbait headline, but then in the actual text, it's not necessarily a lie? Are we talking about a flat-out lie? Are we talking about political misinformation? So again, it's its own panel discussion, but I would say that when we talk about targeted persuasion, that's where some of our new tooling and transparency is really trying to get at the heart of. So you can flag content saying you think it is fake, you think it's a lie, you think it's misleading. And if there are pages that are continuously being flagged for that, and we're working with third parties to review what that looks like, and it includes incitement and dangerous speech, then they will lose the ability to use ads. They will lose the ability to target people. That's how people get targeted. And when we talk about pushing people towards beliefs, some of this is dialogue-based. So if your friends are sharing links to articles, some of this is within your own echo chamber or your own community online, and that's a kind of separate issue than somebody targeting you outside of your friend community. So we can kind of discuss the nuances around that. But it's a big issue, and I would say that this discussion is not done, and I would say that the evolution of where we need to draw the line and how proactive or non-reactive we should be in certain elements of this is going to come to a human rights law and look at where does human rights lines, where do those get drawn versus when are we talking about over-censorship? Because it's not technically illegal to lie, and we don't want to define truth for you, but we also don't want misinformation that's pushing and impeding on things like elections.
So that's the beginning. I think that's the beginning of a further conversation, and we hope that we can could give you some appetizers of the conversations that are probably going to happen for the next 2 to 3 years. We need to close up. And before we close up, I would like from all of you, in one sentence, to answer me that question. I know it's very hard. What would be your recommendation to the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development? One sentence, recommendation or demand?
Yeah, 2 recommendations.
2 recommendations, very quickly.
Yeah, sustain local NGOs, right? And then hear what they have to say, and then come back and do work here to pressure, I don't know how it works here, but export of surveillance tools, giving good with the right hand and giving bad to the government with the left hand. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Nighat.
I'll echo what she said.
Erin.
I would just repeat, not working in a silo. It can't be one company working alone.
Not working for Facebook.
Offer what?
Not working for Facebook.
Not working for Facebook. Okay, we can talk later. I'm very open for dialogue. But I think that, you know, I also feel like you need to be part of what changes from within sometimes. And I think coming from an activist background, an NGO background, an academic background, sometimes you need to push change from within as well.